This is the fifth and last video of this section, implementing role-based access control. In our last video, we learned how to use ACF to control access to individual pages of our application. If ACF is the broadsword of application security, then RBAC is the surgeon's scalpel. We can create user roles and then assign them permissions in order to control access to almost every aspect of our application. We'll look at how to enable the auth manager, create permissions and roles, and then how to assign roles to our users. Role-based access control is an extremely powerful and flexible tool, which allows you to control what actions your users can perform. The trade-off, however, is that it takes a bit of work to get started. The very first step is to enable the auth manager component in our application. There are actually two different classes that we can use to store our access rules, PHP Manager and DB Manager. The former stores authorization data in PHP files, where the latter stores it in the database. For simplicity's sake, we're going to use PHP Manager. We'll also need to create an RBAC directory to store our rules. If you've loaded the code samples for this video, we've already done that for you. Next, we'll need to generate the RBAC configuration. Open up monstercontroller.php from the commands directory, and you'll see a few new controller actions that will be used to set up our authorization rules. Console commands have their own configuration file, which is located in config console.php. Add the auth manager configuration to the components section of this file as well. The first method, action permissions, is used to create two permissions, one called update monster and the other called delete monster. After creating and describing these permissions, we use the add method to generate configuration files. Switch to the terminal and run the console command monster/permissions. Look at the RBAC directory, and you'll see a new file called items.php, which contains metadata for our two new permissions. Next, we'll create some roles and assign our new permissions to those roles. We're going to set it up so that users in the member role are able to update profiles, while members of the admin role can also delete them. Looking through the action roles method of the monster controller console command, you'll see that we load the permissions objects that we created in the first step and then assign them to local variables. Then, we create the member role, add it, and assign it the update monster permission. Next, we create an admin role, add it, assign it the delete permission, and then also assign it all of the permissions that the member role has, which in this case was just the update monster permission. Run this console command, and then inspect items.php for changes. The next thing that we need to do is make sure we assign our monsters to a role. Open up the monster model, and look at the new aftersave method we've created. As one would expect, this method is run after a monster is added or updated. This will now simply assign Dracula to the admin role, and all of the other monsters to the member role. Head back to the terminal, and run the load monsters command again, so we can assign all of our monsters to a role. Look at the RBAC directory, and you'll see that an assignments PHP file has been created, which maps our user IDs to their new role. Now, let's test out our new delete permission. We can actually integrate our new roles into ACF. We'll head back to controllers monstercontroller.php and look at the ACF rule that we generated in the previous video. Let's split our rule into two. One allow rule for the update action and another for the delete action. In the first browser window, we're logged in as the mummy, who is a member. As you can see, he's unable to delete users. However, our Dracula, our undead admin, is. Don't worry, we'll bring back the Wicked Witch a little bit later. Now, let's work on the update action. But rather than allowing all members to edit each record, it makes sense that members should only be allowed to edit their own profile, while users with the admin role should be able to edit all users. Just for fun, let's focus on showing or hiding the pencil icon, depending on whether a user should or shouldn't be able to edit a particular profile. Open up RBAC profilerule.php from the code samples, and you'll see a class with a name attribute, which is set to own profile, and a public method named execute. In this method, we're checking to see whether the ID of a user matches that of the current user. Now, we need to look at the action rules method in our console command. We create a new instance of our profile rule and add it to the auth manager. Then, we load our update monster permission and set its rule name attribute to modify own profile. Finally, we update the update monster permission. Now, we need to find the code that generates our list view. It's in views monster index.php. We'll add the following code to apply our new rule to the output of those icons. There's a lot going on here, but most of it's related to the output of the buttons, which is something we'll cover in the next section, so let's ignore it for the moment. Let's focus on this part of the code, which runs the can method of our application user. The can method either takes a role name, in this case admin, as a parameter, or a permission name. So, if a user is an admin, the pencil icon should print next to all of the rows. However, if a user simply has the update monster permission, then it will only print next to their own row. Finally, if the user doesn't have the permission at all, then the icon won't print. So first up, let's see what happened to Dracula. Nothing. He still has a pencil icon in each row. However, Mummy still has a pencil icon only in his row. And, if we log out, we'll see that all of the pencil icons disappear. One last thing to be aware of is that in production, you would also want to check this permission in your controller action, because technically, a user with the update monster permission could still access the update page manually by typing the update URL. That was definitely a lot of information, but hopefully you'll agree that it was well worth the effort. Now, we understand the basics of RBIC, which is the final piece of the user component in our application. We already learned how to configure and create users, make them more secure, and then control their access to controller actions. In the next section, we'll try to spruce up our application by looking at some of the front-end features of YII.